Hey, if you like some of my NBA discussions here, make sure to subscribe to my other channel, which is original NBA content, which I post every week about different NBA topics. And yeah, it's a new channel, so make sure to support it. And yeah, hope you enjoy. Hi, my name is Lyric, and today we are finishing off the Greatest Peaks series. This is the finale of the Thinking Basketball Greatest Peaks series, the ultimate ender right here. The top 10 best NBA peaks since 1977 by Ben Taylor of Thinking Basketball. All right. So we react to all the greatest peaks episodes, and he's gonna say what he believes is the top 10 greatest NBA peaks of all time. Now I have a personal top 10 all-time list. An all-time list is kind of different from an all-time peaks list, but I do have a top 10 all-time greatest NBA players of all time. Now this is only since 1977, so I made a top 10 list of players I think are the top 10 greatest players to play in the NBA since 1977. But I'm also accounting for this video came out in 2021, April 2021, so it's been 2 years, and I think guys, particularly the two players I think potentially would have made the top 10 since 1977 since then, Giannis and Jokic. I think both of those guys actually would have made it above my 10 spot on the list. I think either of them would have made the 10 spot over who I have at 10, but I'm going to reveal my list as the video goes on and to show how my list differs from his, and at the end what you'll see my top 10 list versus his top 10 list. And yeah, just where we differ, and we're gonna see who he thinks is the top 10 greatest basketball players of all time. It's very interesting because I know Ben Taylor, Thinking Basketball, has a very high basketball IQ, and we've watched this entire series so far just to get to this point. So let's get into it. Also, in the comments below, please leave your recommendation of who you think is the top 10, your top 10 all time since 1977. So this is what we're talking about here. But also, if you want to just add in those guys, like Bill Russell, Wilt. Kareem. Those are the three guys I off my top 10. So there were four guys that I was probably going to put in this list if it wasn't since 1977. Those four guys were Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He played after 1977. It was really good, but his peak I think was before it. So I decided to leave him off the list just for simplicity's sake. I left off Bill Russell. Wilt Chamberlain, obviously, they both retired before 1977, and Julius Erving, who obviously has some very great years, but I think his peak was in the ABA, which was before 1977, because he's starting at 77, because that's the NBA-ABA merger. So I decided to leave those guys off the list. So no Kareem, Russell, Wilt, or Erving. It was the four guys I decided to leave off just because of the time date. But you want to keep those guys in your list, just make a top 10 all the time. I would love to hear that. Yeah, as you saw at the beginning of the video, I have a regional channel for original NBA videos. Please go check that out. And yeah, let's not waste any more time. Let's just get going.
After 15 videos and 6 hours
15
of breakdowns,
videos.
We've arrived at
Damn,
the
6 hours.
endeavor of
Here we
ranking these players. Before
Comment below if you've seen all my reactions to all these videos, man. If you can binge them too.
we hit the countdown,
Maybe be a fun
there are
time.
a few things to
If you're a basketball
sort out.
fan.
First, I considered a handful of active players
Active players, okay.
as candidates for this series, but they still may be peaking. There are a number of videos on this channel about them already if you're interested.
Yeah, we might check out some of his analysis on other players that aren't in the series, because I like some recommend that, like Jokic and Giannis, which I'm very curious of, because I think those are some of the greatest players of all time that do deserve to be in this area with these guys.
There were also older players who didn't quite make the cut, and for some of you, these players will be in your personal top 10s. Many of them will hopefully be featured in a future series. But the best of the rest for me were probably Dwayne Wade and Dirk Nowitzki.
Dwayne Wade and Dirk Nowitzki, two very great players, especially as a Mavs fan. They just made the Hall of Fame this year, both of them. Actually, as a matter of fact, they both made the Hall of Fame this year, very recently. And yeah, I don't have either of them in my top 10 either, since 1977. Don't have neither of them in my top 10. But they're pretty close. I'd say they're in the top 15 range. Yeah, I think they're definitely very close.
Next, remember the criteria for this series. We're only interested in on-court impact that increases a team's odds of...
On-court only. Does not factor in aesthetics, cultural influence, innovation, accolades, championships, or memorable plays. Wow, not including championships is actually a big thing. I don't know if I'd agree with. I know a lot of people would agree with, but I feel like on the court it would include... if you're able to lead your team to a championship, or at least how you performed. I feel like you would take that into account, how you performed to lead a team to a championship. Yeah. Accolades, I mean, it makes sense if you're just considering, how good they were, not specifically, they won MVP and stuff. Yeah, no cultural influence, no Allen Iverson in this, you know. Helping team. Okay, number 2. Let's explain this one right here.
Winning a championship. There are also.
Okay, so he's accounting how good they are in helping a team win a championship, not just if they won a championship or not, which I would agree with mostly. Overall impact that scale to better and better teams. So basically, Steph Curry, I think, is going to be really high on his list. Because, I mean, he's a completely scalable player. He doesn't demand the ball all the time, you know. Which I think made me put a guy like Magic Johnson a bit lower on his list compared to other people's list. Off-ball value, passing, and defense. Yeah, things that go across everything. So you know. So I think Tim Duncan is probably going to be high on his list.
This is about a player's impact in his time.
Yeah, relative to year, which I do 100% agree with. You know, no time machines here. How good was the player in his own time? 100% agree with that, because there's no way to know how good, you know, Larry Bird would defend against Kevin Durant or whatever. You just have to go with what they did at the time compared to what guys are doing in their time.
A peak must have multiple seasons, so players with single-year spikes will be slightly.
So no, you know, no Tracy McGrady here. No Linsanity.
Lower than if this were a list.
No Brad and Roy. No Derrick Rose.
Of one-year peaks. And finally,
at least 2 consecutive seasons, larger sample avoids single fluky seasons.
This list only includes stars after the ABA merger in 1977.
The editing mistake is 1997.
And the simple reason for this is confidence.
Comparable league structures and economics, yeah, a bit different in the 60s, I guess, with fewer teams, you know, rules change and all that, mostly within the three-point era. It makes sense, because spacing and stuff was a lot different back in the day. Fucking everyone in the damn paint. I mean, it was like that kind of in the 80s, but there was a little bit of spacing, you know. You could shoot the three, you know, playing with, like, Larry Bird and stuff, you know. But
we don't have the same data quality going far back in time, and we have a considerable shortage of film in the 60s.
Yeah, I mean, not 90% of Wilt Chamberlain's career wasn't even filmed, including his 100-point game, which is the biggest travesty of all time.
Even the early 70s to work with.
Limited data, limited film.
Confidence intervals back then are much wider. Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell, Jerry West, and Oscar Robertson would all be strong top 10 candidates if we went back to the shot clock, but 100%. There's a bit too much uncertainty to give them the same level of depth as these post-merger stars.
100% agree. 100%
uncertainty will be a theme on this list. I'll emphasize ranges as usual, but the size of those ranges will be larger than normal because these players are so good that a 5% confidence interval makes a bigger difference than with typical all-NBA level players.
Less about my particular order and more about the information and rationale.
In a way, that's one of my biggest takeaways from this series. There's only so much we can reasonably differentiate between players of this quality with the tools we currently have. With that said, here's my best effort to sort out the best of the best. If I held everyone else on this list constant and used an optimistic evaluation, Bill Walton could go as high as 10th.
Damn, that's
either
actually
Kevin
insane.
Durant or Kobe Bryant could be up at 8th. But for me, the number 10 slot goes to Magic Johnson.
All right, so he's Magic at 10. That is lower than I personally have him on my list. Quite a bit lower, like a lot lower. So on my list, I'm gonna say how much. Okay, so I have Magic at number 4 on my list. Okay, number 4. The reason I had him at number 4 on my list is I think he is very arguably the greatest offensive player of all time. The scoring and passing combo is absolutely nuts. In his prime, he was averaging well over 20 points per game on very good efficiency, while averaging 13 assists. He is the greatest passer of all time, greatest playmaker of all time. I feel he scales up because he makes every player around him better, even if he does demand the ball a bit more than I think maybe you would like. He makes every player around him so much better with his insatiable playmaking ability, but also to go along with very underrated scoring. He was like a top 10 scorer in the NBA at his prime, to go along with his being the greatest passer of all time. And I think that makes him, I put him a lot higher than what he did. I mean, the guy dominated the conference so much that, I mean, there was no debate on who was the best guy in the Western Conference at all when he was playing. I mean, it's hard when you see a guy relative to their time go to the finals, lead their team to the finals year after year after year, win multiple championships. I know he's not counting that, but I would count that really. in what you're doing. If you're able to lead your team, to actually show me like physical proof that you're able to lead your team to the championships, it really shows me that championship equity. So I put him a lot higher on the list. Not as high as some people have him. I do have a certain person above him that I think a lot of people don't have above him. He's very familiar to. We'll get to that later. But yeah, number 10. I'm wondering where he's gonna have Bird. Very interested where he's gonna have Bird.
Magic is a candidate for the best offensive player in history because he relentlessly hunted for high-end shots.
So one thing about him that I think maybe would set him back is that he is a bit of a neutral on defense. I don't think he is, from what I've seen, not an active liability, but I think he is more of an average defender at best, which I think, but I don't think being an average defender is that big of a downfall in a player's game. I think because good offense beats good defense, I think if you're an average defender while being the greatest, you don't really hurt the team. You don't hurt the team being an average defender, okay? You hurt the team being a bad defender, which is what a guy like, who's super good offense, like not the great defense, like a guy like Steve Nash, why I wouldn't put him up in these conversations, Some seasons in Dirk's prime, he wasn't that great of a defender, But, I don't feel like he hurt the team that much being an average defender. And along to get, he was super good at stealing. One of the greatest, pickpocketers of all time. Averaged like north of 3 to 4 steals a game in his prime. So I don't think that hurts him too much, though I do think it stops him from being anywhere near the conversation as like the GOAT. That's what I would view it as.
His own scoring or passing. This concept is discussed in Thinking Basketball, the book, in more detail.
Bro's got a book.
We also have decades of plus-minus data showing us that volume playmaking is incredibly valuable. Remember, the Lakers' offense torched opponents during Magic's peak, but these were also gifted offensive rosters. Without Irvin from 1986 to 89, the Lakers were still 2.4 points ahead of league average in 29 games, and some of those games were played without the secondary playmaking of Michael Cooper. I also think we underestimate just how skilled Magic was as a scorer.
Right, very underestimated. Very efficient scorer.
Series, we see times where he ramped up his own volume with great success. Those numbers inside the circles are his team's offensive efficiency, so a plus 14 means the Lakers' offensive rating was 14 points better than their opponent's regular season defense, a fantastic number.
Cooking them, basically, what that means.
I view Magic as one of the 3 best decision makers in league history, and that's
first all-time passer rating, 32nd all-time creation,
reflected in his box score.
Yeah, all-time passing, speed, and transition in half court, tight handle and use of body, high-level post game, crafty finisher and foul drawer, strong outside shooter with space. Yeah, but I didn't realize when I was doing these reactions, I never realized how good of a mid-range shooter he was. He really is really good mid-range shooter. Poor fit with other ball-dominant wings. Also an amazing free throw shooter.
Where he looks like one of the
which is a lot better of an attribute than people tend to make
best offensive players ever. A minor downside is that he needs the ball to exert that value, so he paired best with finishers and great quick-hitting post players. But the much bigger issue in this conversation is his defense.
Right, here we go. Struggled against quick guards, preferred to roam around near paint, and help near paint. Weak rim protection, good defensive rebounder, solid trapping instinct, decent hands near ball. Also the reason why I have him a lot higher personally is the guy's a 6'9" point guard. Come on. You put him in any lineup, there's going to be mismatches that are going to happen. It could be sometimes in, a poor situation, like a mismatch in a bad way, if you get a guard too quick for Magic to guard. But, I think any matchup you have, maybe he's too quick. I feel like that matchup is still not going to be as nearly as much of a mismatch as it's going to be on defense for any point guard, the average point guard, guarding a 6'9" point guard. It's just not going to happen. You're going to need to make big positional changes, which can mess up your entire defense, make everything a lot harder, Yeah, I just feel like having a 6'9" point guard who is not like a natural point guard. It's not just a 6'9" guy who decides to play point guard. He is a natural point guard as they come. Really helps your team. So that's why I have him.
He often guarded bigger, lesser skilled players, while smaller, more skilled.
I think he's also going to have probably going to have a Curry as the greatest point guard of all time, which I wouldn't agree with but I think it's a lot closer than a lot of people make it out to be.
Defenders like Cooper or Byron Scott took the opposing lead guard. More importantly, he just wasn't much of a paint presence despite his size, usually playing one of the forward positions on defense. So I see Johnson as a neutral defender during these seasons, and even a negative by the end of the 80s. My low-end evaluation would drop him behind everyone else in this series, but his high-end estimation would take him all the way to 5th. While Magic was
so even his high-end estimation is still lower than I have him. Okay, so I don't know. Comment below. Am I overrating Magic? Let's see. I don't know. Let's see who we have.
We saw the impact of two-way bigs throughout this series. Walton's defense and high post offense led to a dominant 2-year stretch during an era of parity, and stars like Anthony Davis, Kevin Garnett, Tim Duncan, David Robinson, Dave Cowens, and Wilt Chamberlain have all racked up championships playing this defensive
number 1, offensive number 2. Yeah, very important role to play.
Number 1, offensive number 2 role. You know who else played that role? Scottie Pippen. These aforementioned players have starred on 13 championship teams since the merger, 16 if we include an even weaker offensive player like Draymond Green, 18 if we include a slightly weaker defender like mid-80s Kevin McHale, and then there are lighter versions of this archetype like Rasheed Wallace and even late career Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Okay, come on. Rasheed Wallace not number 1 defense, to be real here, but
depending on where we draw them.
But yeah, that's a super important player type to have that a lot of people don't talk about. I mean, you just the
lines, about half of the titles since the ABA merger have featured one of these defensive stars who is also a big offensive contributor. By comparison, a little more than 2/3 of all post-merger championships have been led by clear-cut offensive superstars like Magic or Kobe, which leads us to the case study for building around this.
So it's a case thing. Maybe it's not, because that's been proven so much championship equity. Maybe the defensive number 1, offensive number 2 guys are way more valuable than people make them out to be, which I could see that. 100%.
Archetype, Tim Duncan.
Tim Duncan, number 9. Okay. Where did I have Tim Duncan on my list? I can't remember. So I had then I had hold up. I'm trying to remember here. So I had, actually, thinking about it, I had Tim Duncan in the same exact spot. We both have Tim Duncan in the same exact spot. We both had Tim Duncan number 9. So I actually perfectly agree with him on this. I do think Kobe is better than Tim Duncan. We're going to get to that. A lot of debate on that front because they both played in the same era and they both won 5 championships, but I do think Kobe was the better player. But Tim Duncan, 100%. I mean, about the archetype, one of the best defenders to ever play basketball, 100%. No debate on that. While also being an underrated offensive player in his prime. I mean, I was watching the 2003 finals, full games. I mean, it's insane to watch just how impactful was Gort. One of the underrated passing big men of all time. In his prime, he was getting like 6-7 assists like per playoff game. An amazing rebounder, and one of the greatest defensive players of all time. And he was like one of the top scorers. I mean, I think scoring was probably his weakest attribute, which is what puts him, I think, a little bit lower. Because I mean, scoring. Let's be real. Scoring is the most important part of basketball, and that was his weakest point. But I think it's a little bit back. But I mean, just can't deny what he adds to a championship team. 100%.
Duncan, alongside quality teammates, Duncan made these Spurs a title contender in basically every season he was healthy during his prime.
Healthy Tim Duncan, you're automatically a title contender.
Metrics in the playoffs are even better than Magic's, although I do think there's some noise to sift through there. His surrounding years look drastically different, despite being a fairly similar player. Compare that to someone like Garnett, whose postseason numbers throughout his prime consistently echoed his historically strong regular season plus-minus results. KG's tricky to evaluate because he only played a few dozen games in Minnesota and because scoring was his weakest attribute. He was just entering his prime as a scorer in 2003 before leveling up again in 2004, which leaves us with 4 playoff series to analyze, And half of those games were against the Lakers, a team statistically underrated.
It's really hard to rank these guys that are their worst attribute is scoring because they're so good at everything else, but their worst attribute is the most important attribute. It's hard to weigh that. And I know there's some people who say like, oh, Kevin Garnett was actually just as good as Tim Duncan. Tim Duncan just had better teammates, which I heavily disagree with.
By their regular season defense and a team Garnett struggled with in general. Despite being a slightly weaker scorer in Boston, his playoff numbers in 2008 were better when he was the leading postseason scorer on a good but not great championship offense. With small samples like this, we can also look to the regular season for clues, where Garnett's adjusted scoring numbers against stronger defenses looked almost identical to Duncan's during their best scoring years. Timmy did beat up on weaker defenses in a way Garnett never did, and I think that reflects a slight isolation scoring edge for Duncan. He was able to pressure the rim with his strength and low post game. Duncan's playoff scoring during their peaks was a clear rung above what Garnett ever reached, but Garnett's also pretty clearly a better
Very good isolation scorer, uses power and length to grind a hoop to spike free throw rate. Good post passer and outlet passer, yeah, but I was just discussing better on structured reads to cutters and shooters. Off-ball value from rebounding and movement, weak outside shooting, and slow style hurts scalability. Okay. Okay. Defense, elite paint protector, incredible length and good positioning, awareness, and discipline. Incredible second contest from floor-bound approach. Excellent sturdy man defender. Great drop-style defender from length, vulnerable to quickness on the outside. Makes sense.
Passer to me, which gives him a minor playmaking edge. Ultimately, neither of these players is driving a world-class offense by themselves. They need to be paired with another.
So I'm curious. I think he's a big guy, looking on how good KG was. I think he actually might have KG at 8 here, and put him in the top 10, and above Duncan, let alone, which would make him think Kevin Garnett is the greatest power forward of all time, which is a big statement, a huge statement, which I would not agree with that one. Offense, good scorer in post and mid-range, lack of rim pressure, too many long twos hurt efficiency. Excellent short roll and interior passer, good passer from post, top and on drives, off-ball and quick-hitting game, pick-and-roll finishing, spacing make offense highly scalable.
Another heavy lifter or two, and that's where Garnett's extra passing, outside shooting, and quick-hitting attack makes up some value, despite Duncan's edge in isolation scoring. On defense, I used to actually prefer Timmy's rim protection for that era because his team's defenses were so good. But I think it's pretty clear now that these Spurs were an elite defensive team without Duncan. He and KG actually saw similar changes in some of these defensive metrics. For instance, Minnesota couldn't protect the paint like San Antonio, but the degree of improvement in paint defense with Garnett on the court was comparable to Duncan's. And KG has the best defensive awareness of any player I've ever studied.
God damn, yeah, I think he's putting Kevin Garnett from both the greatest video I saw on him and this video. I think he thinks Kevin Garnett is the greatest defender of all time. Just straight up. GOAT level mobility and awareness for a big man. Elite low paint protector. GOAT level in show and recover pick and rolls. Elite man defender who can bite on up fakes. High IQ, super switchable, plays passing lanes well, and entries on drives. Yeah, I think his view of Kevin Garnett's defense as so high. I think he's going to put Kevin Garnett above Tim Duncan all time.
In a considerable sample. That's enough for me to give him a small edge on defense, and I value his passing and out.
All right, Kevin Garnett, 8th greatest player of all time. Okay, so I did not have Kevin Garnett in the top 10. Just straight up did not have him in the top 10. I'd probably put him around the 11th or 12th spot on my list, though. So I had him pretty close to the top 10, but I did not have him in the top 10. Yeah, I think I wasn't thinking as highly of his offensive game. I mean, he was a great passer for a big man, but I don't know. I just didn't value his scoring and nearly enough. I feel like Duncan's prime scoring was way better, and I don't feel like his playmaking is as worse as maybe he views it as. with Garnett, and I feel like Duncan just had a far more championship equity than Garnett. With Garnett, you know, I feel like I mean obviously we have to factor in Garnett was on far worse teams. But I feel like Tim Duncan, maybe some of his teams were a bit underrated. I mean overrated by his help. Maybe in like 2003, like where he's saying his prime is right there, a bit overrated. I feel like for how much he overachieved compared to, I feel like it makes sense that Duncan's teams would outperform Garnett's, but I feel like to the level they outperformed is a bit understated by him a little bit. I feel like he was a lot more of a team player and stuff. So, I mean, Garnett, I'm not denying that he is probably pretty underrated and a lot closer to Tim Duncan than a lot of people say. But obviously, Tim Duncan had a lot more longevity and stuff, and But I feel that I would definitely prefer Duncan. I do heavily disagree on Garnett being above Duncan all time here. So it's very interesting that he put him there. I also don't view Garnett as up there as the greatest defender of all time. Maybe I need to do some more research on that, see where he's coming from with that. But I think he's definitely up there, definitely like top 10. But I feel like he's putting it up there as like the greatest defender of all time, which I don't know. Let's see how this goes.
Shooting next to better and better.
Damn, he can view him up to 3. That's actually insane.
Teammates. If that's not crazy enough for you yet, at number 7 is the controversial Steph Curry.
All right, Steph Curry at number 7, which actually is the same spot I had him. He's had 2 players where we actually have them in the same exact position. Duncan number 9 and Curry number 7. Those are the exact same spots I had them. I think maybe maybe he has Curry higher even now, his peak higher, because I moved him up with his most recent championship, which came out after this video. But yeah, Curry number 7, 100%. I would do it. I would not have him above Magic, but I understand if you do, because he is probably up there. I would not be mad if you call him the greatest defensive player of all time, the greatest shooter of all time by far. A very underrated finisher, like very, very underrated finisher. I mean, I can't get over his shooting. The guy shoots the same amount from 3 in his best season as Kobe Bryant shoots from the field, which is why I personally, I don't know where he's going to get to yet, but I personally have Curry over Kobe. I know that's a very, very controversial statement, but I'm just saying, I think Kobe's defense is a bit overvalued, and I feel like his offense is also overvalued. Where I would put, I think Steph Curry's offense is a level above, like a tier above Kobe's offense, with just how efficient he is and how valuable he is, how scalable he is up. And I feel like his defense is underrated. It's not like elite, but I think he is an above average defender. And Kobe, I think, was a very good defender, but I don't feel like he was. I don't feel like that made up for just how valuable Curry is to an offensive team and how much he can scale up and just how much attention he can draw and make things easier for every other player around him. So, yeah, I have Curry above Kobe personally. Very controversial take there, but I do have him at the same spot as Thinking Basketball here.
And yes, Curry also has an argument for as high as number 3 on this list if viewed optimistically. Okay. These players are all just so ridiculously good and hard to clearly separate. Like Magic, Steph is basically providing one-way impact, but I slightly prefer his offensive package. Maybe if we look at his adjusted plus minus over,
it's pretty close. I mean, it's pretty close. It's what you would rather want. Would you rather have all-time great efficient scoring paired with pretty good passing, or would you rather have all-time great, like the greatest playmaking of all time, played with really good scoring on offense? It's pretty close. I'm not mad at it.
Looks like an outlier in offensive impact. Now, one limitation with this stat is that it's hard to untangle it from a player's.
I also just feel like Magic was just better compared to the rest of his colleagues in his time period than Curry was to his. So, yeah.
Role on his team.
I mean, I feel like Magic, there were some years where he was very, very clearly the best offensive player in the league. Where I feel like Curry's prime, there could have been some seasons where you could argue, I mean, to be fair, he played at the same time as LeBron. I mean, but Magic at the end here played at the same time as Jordan, so He makes sense.
In this case, Steve Kerr's offense,
Redick.
Which is why a compelling data point for me is how good Curry was from 2013 to 15, which includes 2 years of Mark Jackson coaching him, and it's before he ramped up his aggression to 11 in 2016. My bigger question with Steph is whether that impact holds in the playoffs. And as we saw during his episode...
Yeah, definitely not as clutch as a playoff performer as Magic. You know, I mean, both of them have had their, you know, tragic Johnson moments, you know, 84, 16, you know. But I feel like they both have had also very clutch playoff moments. But I feel like Magic's clutch playoff moments and what he brings, you know, from his playoff time, I think outweighs what Curry has brought in the playoffs before, which is why I have him above.
I'd say it loses a little bite, but the general signal as an outlying offensive force remains. From 2016 to 2019, the Warriors outscored playoff opponents by 10 points per 48 minutes with Curry on the court, and that was a 15-point improvement from when he sat in those games, almost all of which came on the offensive end.
I mean, his value cannot be understated. I mean, the Warriors with just Kevin Durant, with Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green on the court, but with no Curry, were worse than Curry if Curry was on the court with no Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant, or Draymond Green. I mean, that's just absolutely nuts.
And it's also apparent to me that Curry isn't some clear negative on defense. My concern there is durability 100%. Related. First, could he...
Also just straight up size. You know, 43rd all-time offensive load, 22nd all-time spacing, 33rd all-time creation, GOAT shooter, off dribble and off catch, quick release and range lead to huge volume. GOAT level movement off ball leads to GOAT off ball gravity and all time spacing. Above average on ball passer for a point guard. Good vision but limited by size at times.
Stay healthy.
Makes sense.
And then...
Yeah, the size also just it makes a huge difference in just like would you value you bring to a team. I mean, a 6'9" point guard is gonna have advantages that a 6'2", 6'3" point guard is just not gonna have. Defense, solid man defender at point of attack, good reaction speed, and active feet on ball. Physical in general, handsy, chasing players away from ball. Size, a key weakness, no paint protection, smart schematically with minor awareness fails.
Second, how much could teams wear down his offense by targeting him on the other end and away from the ball? That tactic seemed to have some success, but opponents who sold out to take away his scoring still paid a gravity tax. And since the box
gravity
can't capture
big
that well, it makes
Curry.
it look like his impact declined more than it probably did. At number 6, I start to get a little more comfortable with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Okay, so he's putting Kareem in here. Okay. I was going to not include Kareem because he had his peak after, but I think he's had a peak before 1977. But if you're including his peak after 1977, I'd probably put Kareem higher than 6. This one's a bit weird because I didn't include him on my list. I didn't think he was going to include him, but yeah, I'd probably put him higher than 6. I'd probably have him top 4, third. I'd have him 3rd or 4th on this list. I mean, he's one of the most efficient players of all time with the most indefensible shot of all time. I think only 3 players have blocked it. Wilt Chamberlain and Nate Thurmond, which people don't talk about, and also Hakeem Olajuwon blocked it. Most people just say it's Wilt, but those are the other 2 players I know I've seen block it before. To be fair, Kareem was kind of old when Hakeem was blocking it, but he was still the same shot. And I'm sure Hakeem Olajuwon, arguably the greatest shot blocker of all time. I'm sure he would put up a damn good fight, even if he wasn't able to fully block it if Kareem was in his prime with the full athleticism. But I mean, Kareem, one of the most unstoppable offensive scorers of all time. At his prime, averaging 35 a game. Not in the Lakers, but he was more efficient on the Lakers. He brought great gravity because think about it. People knew damn well what shot he wanted to take before he took it, and yet no one could stop it. That's how you know that shit's unstoppable. Also, underrated passer for his position, averaging like 5-6 assists a game in his best seasons. Also being a really fantastic defensive player, which a lot of people don't talk about. He was arguably the best defensive player in the league at his prime, while also being the best offensive player. I think he was very clearly the best player in the NBA for like an entire decade, which I think puts him up when you talk about like compared to how good he was compared to the rest of the league at the time. Yeah, I think one thing that maybe brings him down is he wasn't able to bring as much championship equity as the other guys. Wasn't able to bring his teams up to that competitive of a level for some years. Like if he didn't have help, I feel like he couldn't carry a team on his own mainly, but I don't know how important that particularly is because he's shown to be very good alongside other great players, which I think is a very good thing because you're trying to make a championship team, you're going to have good players. So it makes sense. So I'd probably put Kareem a bit higher. I wouldn't see his reasoning here.
There's certainly less uncertainty for me with Cap.
Though I didn't include him on the list.
Below 10th, although I'm a little lower on his high end than some of the surrounding players, so he lands here. Remember, this is strictly late 70s Kareem, so
right,
including a few of the prior years might even bump him up for me.
Yeah, that would make sense. That would make sense. So maybe I can understand. I can understand the 6th spot if you're only including his Laker years. That can 100% make sense. I like how all these guys are ranking as high as 3 because I think we all know who the top 2 guys are definitively.
He was clearly a strong rim protector, but there were also lulls in his defensive awareness.
7th all-time efficiency.
Well below Walton.
Yeah, up there with Curry as one of the most greatest offensive efficient scorers of all time, and Kevin Durant. All-time post scorer behind Skyhook, good counters to other shoulder, strong cutter passer, elite shot creation, and gravity for era, yeah. Strong outlet passer, solid offensive rebounder, yeah, rebounds as well. Forgot to mention that. Especially because he's so goddamn tall. He's 7'2", and also he was measured in the era where they measured without shoes. So I think today he'd probably be measured at around 7'3", maybe even 7'4", which is nuts. I mean, it's like damn near the height of Wembanyama.
Paint protector.
Defense, high-level rim protector with huge block radius and paint coverage. Contest limited a bit by average reaction time, average motor. Good switch defender for era. Length helped defend post, but lacked physicality. Okay, so he's a bit less high on the defensive end.
But pinpointing Kareem's exact defensive impact is tricky, and minor changes would move him up a few spots on a list like this. Another challenge is gauging his offensive impact without a three-point line. More modern post players can spruce up their shot creation by kicking it out to shooters for 3.
This is true. Because he was limited by not playing. And I feel like a lot of post players potentially could have been, if they were super efficient post scorers, could have been a lot more effective in modern era, like Shaq and Kareem, because especially because he was a really good outlet passer. I mean, not outlet passer, post passer. I mean, I feel like he would particularly benefit being able to kick out to a lot more spread shooters with a lot more spacing in the modern NBA than when he played. A lot of guys more packed into the paint, and also more guys here to defend him at the damn rim. If there was less guys defending him at the rim, he was more people to him to pass it off to with the spacing. I feel like it would greatly help him get even more damn hook shots off.
But Abdul-Jabbar didn't have that luxury. He had some post gravity, and he could pass.
Though on the defense, I feel like he would be a bit more limited because it wouldn't be as important paint defense as it is modern NBA. As modern NBA, paint defense isn't as important as it was back in the day. So I guess they balanced out stuff a little bit, but I think it'd be mostly positive for him coming into modern NBA. But it was really his
crazy scoring
that
here powered most of his value. We've talked about resiliency in this series, and that sky hook was just about as resilient as it gets. You can see from his series-by-series results that it was almost impossible to take away his individual scoring. But I don't think he had the playmaking to crack the inner circle of modern offensive legends.
Wow,
so while he's an incredible post anchor for the time, I'm not confident he has one of the 3 or 4 best peaks since the merger.
All right.
At number 5, I have Larry Bird.
Wow, so he has Larry Bird. Not only does he have Larry Bird above Magic, he has Larry Bird significantly above Magic. Yeah, right. Wow, 5 spots above Magic. I've never seen someone have Bird. I've obviously seen people have Bird above Magic, but 5 spots above, I don't know if I agree he's that much better than Magic, though I do think Larry Bird is better than Magic. But I still think he has him ranked too low comparatively. Not comparatively to Magic Johnson, but I do think he has him too low. Because I had him 3rd I have Larry Bird as the third greatest peak since 1977, only behind the two guys you already know. But I think he's the third greatest peak. I mean, he's such an all-around game. One of the greatest scorers of all time, one of the most efficient scorers of all time. He's a three-way scorer, 50, 40, 90 consistently. Which makes him very scalable. He's not on-ball dominant. So great spacing, great off-ball. While also being one of the greatest passers of all time. Which I think really puts him above Magic because he's one of the greatest passers of all time, while also being a way better scorer and floor spacer than Magic, while also being a better defender than Magic. I feel like he's underrated defensively. I mean, he's a good defender. He's not an all-time great defender, but he's a really good defender. He was an all-defense guy in his prime. And also, what also gets understated, he's probably the greatest rebounder to ever play his position. Maybe you can argue guys in the 60s, like Elgin Baylor and stuff, but, the guy averaged like 15 rebounds a game in the finals as a small forward. He's out-rebounding Moses Malone, which is absolutely nuts. Also go for the fact that he's arguably the clutchest player in NBA history. He always stepped his game up in the biggest scenarios, a proven championship equity with how many finals he went. He was very clearly, for a period of time, the best player in the world compared to the rest of his colleagues. I feel like at his prime, I feel like he's the third best guy to ever play basketball since 1977, that is. So, yeah.
Who could go all the way back to 13?
I'm very curious who's going to have a 4-3 then if he has Bird at 5.
Low-end perspective, and yes, broken record time could go all the way up to 30.
Once again, he always goes up to it's always at least up to 3 because the top two guys. There's too much better.
Unlike Kareem, Bird's volume scoring is his biggest question mark in an otherwise transcendent offensive package. We know his scoring declined in the playoffs and against strong defenses, but this was still dangerous scoring among closer examination. From 1984 to 87, his adjusted playoff numbers were good, but a step down in volume compared to the best of the best. In the regular season, his scoring rate fell off against the athletic Lakers defense, but there's also reason to believe he was worn down by huge minutes in the playoffs, and that infamous bar fight in the 1985 Eastern Finals might have hampered his scoring that year too. Without Kevin McHale
it's easy to get fatigued when you're friggin' against the bad boy Pistons and the Showtime having full-on fights with the Showtime Lakers every damn series.
Mid-80s, Bird did ramp up his volume by a few points, so I do think he traded in some of his own scoring to set up skilled teammates. And most importantly, that scoring still demanded defensive attention that kept Boston's offense at elite levels. Since we know playmaking is a huge driver of offensive impact,
100%.
I think Bird's incredible passing.
There. All-time dynamic and outlet passer, off-ball game, super scalable, 100%. Strong inside-out scoring and offensive rebounding, 100%. Subpar rim finishing, mediocre handle, limits on ball passing.
Movement, shooting, split-second decision-making, and propensity for finding layups made him an all-time level playmaker. Like Curry,
100%.
that spacing, movement, and even gravity aren't easily detectable in a stat sheet, but they do help the team's offense perform at amazing levels. For example, in 1989, Boston played 40 games with their same starting lineup from the year before, only with Reggie Lewis replacing an injured Bird. That team played slightly over 500 ball and posted a strong offensive rating relative to the league. But when the Celtics had that starting lineup together in 88, they were nearly 6 points better on offense, posting a whopping plus 9.6 offensive rating. And while it's only a single piece of information, it represents the kind of ceiling raising I think Bird had without all-time level scoring. On defense, he was a playmaker with great hands and some rim protection.
High-level awareness and motor for paint protection and clocky passing lanes. Elite reflexes in hands. Strong defensive rebounder. Yeah, the rebounding on both ends is a positive here. Mediocre rim protection. Makes sense. They didn't have that high of a vertical. Perimeter defense against quicker players. Makes sense. Mostly just the athletic ability is what limited a little bit on defense. But we're talking about the effort. And the skill and effort was always there. Just the athleticism that maybe lacked him a little bit on defense, but it caused him no problems on offense.
And was often early in paint rotations. He was certainly limited as a perimeter defender, but that's still a good positive package. which is essentially the difference compared to Magic here, peak for peak.
Yeah.
Much like positions 5 through 8 on this list,
Here we go.
I could flip a coin between 3rd and 4th. Let's start with Hakeem
Right.
Olajuwon.
All right, Hakeem Olajuwon, 4th highest peak of all time. I have him pretty close to there. I have him a little lower. I had him at number 6, at the 6th greatest peak of all time. Though it is, I think, very close. I'm not mad at him as 4 because, I mean, the two-way impact is absolutely nuts. He's arguably the greatest defender of all time. I wouldn't have him the greatest defender of all time. Well, I'd have him as the greatest defender of all time since 1977, I would. So, yeah, I would have, out of all the eligible players here, I'd have him as the greatest defender of all time. While also being an amazing offensive player, highly efficient volume scorer, averaging like over 30 points a game in the playoffs multiple years, being a high-end passer as well. I mean, one of the best passing big men of the time. You know, I mean, I can't understate his defense. I mean, the guy at one time averaged 3 steals a game as a center, while also averaging like 4 blocks a game. It was insane. The guy got a quadruple double, but he also nearly got multiple quintuple doubles because of how many steals and blocks he got, along with his points, rebounds, and assists. I mean, it's nuts. I mean, his back-to-back championship run. I mean, he was so far away the best player in the league for those 2 years because of just his two-way impact. You know. And I think his defense adds so much paired with his his underrated scoring with his fucking dream shake moves and everything. Yeah, I had him at 6, which is a bit lower because I feel like he didn't really I guess peaks he does make sense. I feel like he didn't dominate the championship equity as much as I would like him to for a longer period of time, I guess, because that 2-year stretch was super good. But I feel like all his other years, I feel like he had, I don't know. I feel like he wasn't as good compared to the rest of the NBA in those other years, other than those 2 amazing years. Though, if we're just looking at 2-year peaks, 100% not mad at him going above that. Not that mad about him going above Bird, but I have him below Bird on my list. I have him at number 6.
Whose defense moves the needle so much that it's hard for me to have him lower than 10th.
Once again, up to 3.
Perhaps nothing reinforces the crazy value of rim protection back in the 90s, like Hakeem averaging nearly 5 blocks per game in the 1993 playoffs because the three-point line wasn't popular yet. We have plus-minus studies reaching back into the 90s, slightly after Olajuwon's peak, and rim protectors display some massive defensive value. In the 21st century, the game's best offensive players have reached greater heights than the game's best defensive players. But defensive superstars aren't that far behind. While each individual player has some uncertainty in these studies, the presence of so many dominant rim protectors at the top makes it likely that Olajuwon was in a similar ballpark in terms of value in the mid-90s. I actually find Hakeem's offensive impact to be a bit fuzzier. He was clearly a great isolation scorer who gave teams a solid floor in the playoffs.
I feel like he's not as efficient of a scorer as a lot of these other guys on the list, but it's obviously made up by his fucking great defense.
But he also never played on a really good regular season offense, so we couldn't see him blend his game with another big-time star.
That
his
makes sense.
best offensive teammate was Clyde Drexler in 1995.
Right,
and in 26 games, they posted a healthy offensive rating before an even hotter stretch in their championship run. Playing inside out off of Hakeem's post scoring was clearly the way to build around him. And it's tempting to view their successful playoff offense with that shorter three-point line.
Elite isolation scorer, difficult shot making is inelastic. Subpar shot selection and vision, solid basic playmaker with 3-point shooters. Subpar shot selection, excellent offensive rebounding, good pick and pop skills. So yeah, he views his the offense as a little, not as GOAT level. Compared to his defense there. GOAT level rim protector, incredible timing and agility challenging shots, quick response to threats in paint, will extend to perimeter efficiency, elite post defender, great hands on ball or denying entry, 100%.
As
100%.
Proof that he's a heliocentric superstar. But some of those lineups were offensively slanted and, more importantly, had more viable shooters than most teams could expect at that point, especially with Robert Horry reigning in threes as a stretch power forward.
Big shot, Bob,
I tend to view Olajuwon as the best of the two-way big men, a solid offensive
Makes
centerpiece
sense.
with the
Makes
right
sense.
offensive talent around him, but someone otherwise limited by his playmaking, preventing him from cracking the top 2 on this list.
I think you know who's going to put in number 3.
Shaq, on the other hand,
Yeah,
was
that's who I thought. Shaq, number 3. I know Shaq over Hakeem is very controversial because that's a really good debate. Comment below who would go with that debate, Shaq or Hakeem. I also had Shaq above Hakeem, and I haven't also had him exactly one spot because I think it's very close. I had Hakeem 6 and Shaq 5, but I had Magic and Bird above both of them, which he does not have. But yeah, Shaq once again. Yeah, I think his peak. People talk about Hakeem for Shaq, and they always bring up, oh, Hakeem dominated Shaq in '95. But what people don't realize is, one, he did not dominate him to the extent a lot of people say. It was dominating the fact that they swept the team. But I mean, Shaq's numbers in that series were nothing to scoff at. Personally, I mean, he had one of the greatest final series of all time. He just got outplayed because Hakeem had an even better all-time great final series. But also, Shaq wasn't in his prime yet. Shaq was only in his 3rd season, and his absolute prime on the Lakers, he was better at pretty much everything than he was in '95 on the Magic. At least in my opinion, other than maybe speed and stuff, some athletic things. When he was skinnier. I mean, but like Shaq in his prime, he had like a 3-year prime when he was on the Lakers on that 3-peat run. He had 3 straight finals appearances where the entire team revolved around him. I mean, he literally did everything for the Lakers while being a 7-1 big man. He was the most unstoppable scorer in the NBA, possibly of all time. I mean, the man shot 60% from the field while having multiple players on him every damn play, And also, he got 60% from the field while everyone knew that he could not shoot. So everyone knew damn well where he was going to go, and they could not stop him, putting multiple players on him. I mean, it's literally impossible to stop him. They had to make a whole strategy where they foul out multiple of their players just to, stop him from scoring a bit, which also, made him score even more because, he had to shoot all those fucking free throws. Even though he missed a bunch of them, it made up for the fact that he got to shoot so many fucking of them because they would rather foul him than they would just let him score. He was an elite rebounder in his prime. He has some elite rebounds in his prime. He was the best passing big man in the NBA when he was in his prime. In the finals, he was getting like 6-7 assists, great passer out the paint, on par with Olajuwon on that one, if not better passer than Olajuwon. Defensively, this is where people say, because Hakeem is undoubtedly a better defensive player than Shaq, but I think Shaq's defense does go underrated. I mean, in his prime, he was finishing 2nd in DPOI. He was an elite rim protector. He was arguably the best rim protector in the NBA in that 3-peat run. You could argue he probably wasn't, but people were arguing, he was at least like top 5 in that area, while also putting all that energy on offense, playing a lot of minutes for a guy, that fucking has to, carry all that fucking weight as big as as he is. I mean, the man did everything for the Lakers. He was arguably the best guy on the Lakers at literally every single aspect of basketball. Granted, you could also say that about Hakeem, but I feel like Shaq is a lot better of an offensive player than Hakeem. I feel like he was a lot more efficient of a scorer than Hakeem, and I feel like teams had to revolve their defense a lot more about guarding Shaq than they had to do about guarding Hakeem. And I feel like the offensive gap is a bit more than the defensive gap, and I feel like people had to teams had to mold their defensive and mold their strategies more around guarding the 134 than the other 34, and I feel like it really, and I feel like, I mean, the Shaq in the 2001 absolutely dominated, averaged like 36 points a game against the defensive player of the year, Dikembe Mutombo. If that's not unstoppable, I don't know what is. I averaged 38 points, and the year before that, he averaged 38 points a game in the finals. Well, I was averaging, I think it was 38 points, 17 rebounds a game. I mean, it's absolutely fucking nuts. I think Shaq is one of the, almost unstoppable peaks of all time. I'm not mad at him saying he has a top 3 peak ever, and I do think he is better than Hakeem. So, yeah.
Was a true all-timer on offense.
Let's go.
He was also aided by 3-point shooting teammates, but O'Neal separated himself in a few ways from basically every offensive center in the first 65 years of the shot clock. His off-ball presence,
Jokic.
constantly working for dangerous paint catches, allowed him to fit next to perimeter stars without monopolizing the
16th
ball.
all-time scoring rate.
He was also a solid passer, so he could hit those
all-time level interior scoring, good post passer to cutters and three-point shooters, off-ball game, rebounding and paint movement, gravity, fits well with wings, all-time foul draw rate, 100%. No outside game whatsoever. The thing is, though, I'm just saying, yeah, I mean, it makes sense, but, like, bro, everyone knew that where he wanted to go, and they cannot stop him from getting there.
Shooters and cutters, too. If we return to that 4-year plus-minus graphic in the playoffs, Shaq barely missed qualifying because he only sat for 448 minutes, but his impact looks enormous, and unlike most big men, that impact is primarily on offense. Ironically, it's defense that keeps the diesel down for me. The Lakers surrounded him with a ton of
high-level shot blocker, win in position and paint, size equals strong man defender, low motor, super stationary and paint, not quick to help, easy to stretch and pick and roll with jump shooting big men. Okay, so he doesn't view his defense as high, but he's still, because of how the offense game is so high, he still has him above fucking Hakeem.
3-and-D players, and even though Shaq had success as a rim protector, his lack of mobility and engagement clearly limited his defensive punch relative to his size. In a number of series over the years, teams successfully attacked O'Neal in pick and roll, and stretch big men could give him problems as well. Most impact metrics view his regular season defense as good, but a clear rung or so below the great defensive big men. And that defensive plus-minus might be inflated because opposing coaches played so many unskilled bigs just to bang with Shaq and eat up fouls. Still, of all the players we've discussed so far, my high-end evaluation of Shaq would take him above everyone else, although there is still some separation between him and the top two players on this list.
Yeah, I think we all know who the top two is.
Jordan and LeBron James.
Wow.
Before this series, I thought Michael had some space between him and LeBron, but I'm not so sure.
Okay, I thought it was him definitively placing LeBron at number one. I was gonna say, wow. Okay, so we'll see who he has.
Then again, I'm more confident in MJ's floor as a player. My low-end range would take him just a hair behind Shaq's high-end evaluation, whereas James has more question marks for me that take his low-end estimation
2011
down a bit more. If I were building a team with role players who could shoot and defend, I'd probably take LeBron. He's one of the three best decision makers of the three.
Let's have him definitively placing. We can see who he's going to definitively place here. But I'm just going to give you a spoiler alert. I have Jordan number one and LeBron number two. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to really explain this. I feel like Jordan, personally, is a better scorer. I think... they're both really efficient scorers, but I don't know. I would trust Jordan in most scenarios as a scorer, but a much more dominant scorer of his time, while being not that much worse of a playmaker as he's given credit for. I think he's a better defender, and I think he's a more clutch performer. I think he brings more championship equity. And overall, I just think he is a better player and was way more dominant over his time, and is the most dominant of his time over every aspect of the game of any player in NBA history. He is the GOAT in my opinion, but I do think LeBron is not as far off as a lot of people, especially my audience, like to see him as. I don't think he's that far off. I mean, the guy is he's one of the best scorers in NBA history. He's literally the all-time scorer in NBA history, one of the most efficient scorers in NBA history at his prime, while also being one of the all-time great playmakers in NBA history, and also being an amazing defender, one of the most versatile defenders in his prime, and also being a super clutch performer, even though a lot of people don't see him as, there's no denying, but just looking at pure numbers, he is one of the clutchest performers of all time. So I'd probably put him, I easily have him number two, and I think there's a significant gap between 2 and 3. I think the gap between 1 and 2 isn't that big, but I would still have Jordan.
Their offense, a resiliency,
23rd all-time scoring rate. GOAT level finisher on drives from power, size, feel. GOAT level transition scoring. Elite pick and roll and drive kick playmaking, and elite scoring is resilient. Pick your poison offense. LeBron has to be the most versatile player of all time. Outside shot mediocre, poor fit with other ball dominant players.
you with playmaking. And yes, I do think peak LeBron was
solid rim defense, solid rim protection and paint presence, excellent speed on rotations and in passing lanes, very good awareness off ball, communicates knowledge of opposing scheme, guards 5 position with some success, vulnerable navigating screens with
a better defender
quickness
than this version
outside.
of MJ, and this two-way impact makes better than this version of MJ.
All right, so he thinks LeBron is a better defender than MJ. Wow. That's a controversial statement. I would not agree with that one.
And this two-way impact makes James the greatest floor raiser ever in my book.
I'm not mad at that. I think LeBron being the greatest floor raiser ever, 100%, I could agree with that. Because if the man could take the 2007 and 2018 Cavs to the finals, I mean, I think any team in NBA history, you put LeBron James on it, and they are immediately a title contender. You know, at least a contender to make the finals. I would make that.
On the other hand, LeBron matured more as a passer in later years, whereas Jordan pretty much lined up everything from 1989 to
Jordan's 7th all-time scoring rate, 5th all-time creation, 5th all-time offensive load.
Those were
first step in aerial control led to all-time penetrator, elite mid-range pull-up, huge playmaker, which a lot of people don't talk about at all. That's probably one of the biggest, probably the second biggest part of his game, second or third biggest part of his game. With good reactive passing, active off-ball cuts and rebounding, issue shooting into doubles or stuck in air, weak three-point shooter.
His best passing and his best scoring year.
Excellent in passing lanes and active, strong hands. Good man D versus smaller guys. Some rim protection with great awareness. Excellent rebounder. He's really good on his rebounding here, which I think for his position, he's actually a very good rebounder when I'm thinking of it. Lots of gambling, ironically, leads to many errors, vulnerable in post. Yeah, he talked about that a lot in his greatest peaks video.
Well, his defense and motor were still elite. As we saw, Michael has a really strong case for the best scorer in league history.
Yeah,
and that
very good case.
Pressure turned MJ into one of history's greatest playmakers. His shot creation estimates are higher than LeBron's were in his best 3 Miami.
I'd have Jordan as the greatest scorer of all time.
Seasons, even when Wade went to the bench. Then again, LeBron's scoring doesn't seem that far behind Jordan's. He didn't match Michael's overall volume, but remember when Wade sat, LeBron cranked his volume up to MJ levels, and the overall Heat offense was dominant. That whole LeBron ball thing we discussed was pretty good.
Pretty good.
I have both of them as top 10 scorers and playmakers ever during these peaks, and both led high-end playoff offenses. Although Jordan's teams weren't as efficient as LeBron's until Pippen and the rest of the roster rounded into form. It was probably impossible to surround a superstar with specialists in the 80s and reach the offensive height that LeBron ball generated with competent three-point shooters. And that matters here, since this is all about impact relative to era. We only have league-wide plus-minus data in the playoffs since 1997, but Jordan's 3-year peak was up with the modern titans of this stat. And in a more stable metric like augmented plus-minus, MJ would rank second among all players on record. Of course, LeBron's best stretch is third all-time, only that came in his first Cleveland stint, and the fourth best stretch also belongs to LeBron from his second Cleveland stint. These results are all close enough that we can't really distinguish between them in a stat like this, but LeBron's Miami peak was a step lower because, as we've mentioned, letting Wade drive the offense at times took away some of LeBron's on-ball value. It's a similar story in box-only metrics, where Jordan has some separation from LeBron's MVP seasons in Cleveland and a slightly larger edge against him in Miami. Ultimately, I think team construction makes a big difference when choosing between these peaks. LeBron ball works with 3-and-D rosters and stretch big men, but it's also a slower, more tactical approach that doesn't fit as well next to other ball-dominant players.
So it's I feel like for LeBron, you'd have to make a perfect LeBron team. You have to make a certain type of team. I feel like Jordan would work a lot better with basically any team you give him, basically. I mean, like, well, to make a perfect LeBron team versus like making a perfect Jordan team. I mean, maybe not. Maybe not. I don't know.
So if I'm forced to choose, and I don't really want to,
here we go.
I'd give the #1 multi-year peak to Michael Jordan.
There he goes. There he goes. I'm sure a lot of you are glad to hear that, man. Okay, so he's going with Jordan as the best player of all time, and LeBron is #2, which I would agree with. We both have the same top 2. All right, I think okay, let's let him explain the last reasoning here why he has Jordan above LeBron, and then I'll go through my entire top 10.
Because I think he fits on more teams, while LeBron really has to be the engine with spacers around him to
that makes sense.
It
makes sense.
Value.
It makes sense.
Now, I'm only one person, so Thinking Basketball subscribers on Patreon helped out by submitting their rankings after the
Go check out this guy on Patreon, man.
For a wisdom of crowds perspective.
Okay.
The voters also had a clear top 10 with a slightly different order. Duncan and Garnett first, but Garnett was far more polarizing. He was in the top 5 on 15% of ballots versus Duncan's 10%, but KG was left off of nearly a quarter ballots entirely, with Kobe replacing him.
Damn, he didn't have Kobe in the top 10 at all, which is actually insane.
On about 2/3 of those lists. Bird and Magic went next, and then the series' most polarizing player, Steph Curry. Curry finished 3rd in first place votes, while also finishing 8th in top 8 votes. Hakeem and Kareem were in a virtual tie, with Abdul-Jabbar grabbing about twice as many top 3 spots as Olajuwon. Well, Shaq was a clear number 3, placing 2nd or 3rd on nearly half the ballots.
Okay.
And for the #1 spot, 59% of voters went with Michael Jordan, enough to edge out LeBron James and his 32% of the first place votes.
There you go.
So, after 16 videos, 14 players, and 5 glorious decades of NBA history, this has been the greatest peaks.
Oh, this is so sad.
Thank
the ending of the
series.
series.
So much for all of your support during this series.
We love you, Thinking Basketball.
You found this final episode thought-provoking.
Amazing
if you're
final
wondering
episode.
Where to find old games? USA Sports on DVD was a huge source for this series. With
might be a good website, but all right. So that was the top 10 best NBA peaks since 1977. So okay, let's go to my personal top 10 list. So since 1977, my top 10 list at number 10, I had Kevin Durant. So I did not have Kevin Garnett in my top 10, but I did have Kevin Durant. The reason I had him above, I feel like his all-time great scoring. I do rate offense above defense. And I feel like his all-time great scoring. I mean, like I feel like him and Steph Curry are some of the most efficient all-around scorers in NBA history. I mean, the guy's a 50-40-90 guy with high volume threes. You know, well, also, you know, I mean, the guy is 7 foot tall. I feel like in his prime, he was a very unstoppable scorer. I think he does get played down more by his inability to, you know, really being, I feel like, that much of a floor raiser and, you know, that much of championship equity. Though he is very scalable. He does fit into a lot of teams, which is what made him so unfair on the Warriors in 17 and 18. So, yeah, I put him in number 10. Number 9, I had Tim Duncan, or we previously discussed. Number 8, I had Kobe Bryant. He did not make his top 10. I did have, you know, because I took off Kareem off the top 10, but so I had Kobe number 8. Yeah, number 7, I had Steph Curry, as previously discussed. Number 6, I had Hakeem. 5, Shaq. 4, Magic. 3, Bird. 2, LeBron. And number 1, Michael Jordan. Some honorable mentions that could have made the list. You know, guys who I had pretty close. Moses Malone. You know, I mean, the guy, I mean, he wasn't even mentioned here. He didn't have a Greatest Peaks episode, and he wasn't mentioned here. So I feel like he got a bit disrespected. I mean, the guy was the best player in the NBA in his peak, for peak for multiple years in the same era as Kareem, Magic, and Bird. You know, won a championship, dominated Kareem in '83. I feel like he should have at least gotten an episode on him. Wasn't even mentioned at all. So I'm a bit disappointed by him getting not mentioned. You know, Kevin Garnett, obviously I had pretty close to the top 10. He had him in the top 10, you know. Dirk, you know, he mentioned in the beginning, and Wade, I both had pretty close. I both have them top 15 here. but then they were in, but pretty close. Isaiah Thomas. He was, I think on par. Not really on par, but he was as close as you can, as close as anyone got to on Magic and facing off against Magic and Jordan in the late '80s and '90s. One of the greatest scoring and assisting combos in NBA history, right next to guys like Magic, and David Robinson, who I got a Greatest Peaks episode on him, who wasn't really mentioned here, for just an all-time great two-way play. One of the greatest defenders of all time, probably top 5 defender, maybe like a top 5, top 10 defender of all time. On the same defensive, almost on the same defensive level as Hakeem, maybe a bit lower, but yeah. So that's it for the Greatest Peak series, guys. So that is it. I know he's starting a new series on just offensive players, just offensive, just talking about them. I'm probably gonna watch more videos by him, discussing, just analyzing players' games. So I think this is a very interesting series. So hope you guys enjoyed me reacting to this entire series. Go subscribe to my original channel, and leave below your top 10 all-time list. And yeah, bye.